Hello, my name is Eleanor May Harper. I'm 68 years old, and I don't ask for much, just a kind word now and then. Last week, I visited my daughter's mansion in San Diego. I brought her a bag of oranges from my garden. That's all. Just to say hello. But when she opened the door, she screamed, "My mother died when I was 6. And then she pushed me. I raised that girl. Now she pretends I never existed. This is not just about betrayal, it's about being erased. And I won't stay silent." Eleanor carefully placed the bag of oranges on the doorstep of her daughter's mansion, her hand trembling slightly, nerves still raw from 12 years of silence. She stood there for a moment, smoothing the front of her cardigan, willing her body to stillness. "Just a hello," she whispered to herself. "I won't ask for anything." The last time she saw Vanessa, her daughter had just turned 26. Now, at nearly 40, Vanessa had built a life of prestige power and apparently no room for Eleanor. The late autumn air was crisp and dry, the kind that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and cold stone. Leaves crunched under Eleanor's worn shoes. The mansion loomed above her, all sharp lines, manicured hedges, and glass that reflected the pale California sun. It looked nothing like the modest wooden home where she'd raised Vanessa. The front door opened abruptly. Vanessa stood in the doorway, rigid, sleek, in a camel-colored suit. For a brief second, confusion passed across her face, then panic. Eleanor smiled hesitantly and reached down to lift the bag of oranges. Vanessa's eyes darted to the street, to the driveway, to the bag. "What are you doing here?" she said, voice tight, eyes narrowing. Eleanor took a tentative step forward, holding out the bag. "They're from the tree in my backyard. You used to love them. Remember, I don't know who you think you are?" Vanessa hissed, stepping back as if Eleanor were contagious. "I've told everyone my mother died when I was 6. The words fell like ice water. Eleanor blinked. Vanessa turned toward the inside of the house. "You need to go. Right now." "Please, Vanessa, I just wanted to." But the bag was knocked from her hands before she finished. Oranges spilled across the stone steps, rolling chaotically into the trimmed grass. Then the shove came. It wasn't hard, but Eleanor wasn't steady. She stumbled, fell her hip, striking the edge of the bottom step. Her cheek scraped concrete. One orange sat crushed near her face, scent sharp and sudden. The door slammed. She lay there for a long moment, the ache in her body only just forming. But sharper than any physical pain was the echo of Vanessa's words. "Who are you? Who do you think you are?" She had raised that voice, read bedtime stories to it, cried for it, prayed for it. And now it cut her like a stranger's blade. Footsteps approached. From the doorway, another woman appeared, mid-50s, elegant with soft hair pulled into a bun. Her tone was gentle, affectionate. "Vanessa, darling. Are you all right?" Eleanor lifted her head slightly. The woman's voice floated back into the house, and Vanessa responded with a laugh, a bright, familiar sound Eleanor hadn't heard in over a decade. But it wasn't for her anymore. Eleanor peered through the iron gate, just as a burst of camera flashes lit up the driveway. There she was, again, the same woman who had stepped out that day, now standing beside Vanessa, arm linked with hers, smiling with quiet grace. They were posing for the press. A dozen journalists crowded near the front steps of the mansion microphones, raised like weapons or offerings. Vanessa stood tall in a crimson dress, radiant. Beside her, the woman, older but elegant, leaned in, their hands clasped, their cheeks brushed. Eleanor tightened her grip on the cold gate rail. She was just close enough to hear the anchor's voice from a camera crew, a heartwarming story of reunion between a successful CEO and the mother she thought she'd lost. A tale of healing from nothingness. Eleanor stepped back, as if struck. That woman, Margaret, they called her. The warmth in Vanessa's eyes, Eleanor remembered it, had cradled it, had once earned it. She turned away. 2 days had passed since the incident on the porch, and Eleanor hadn't slept much since. Her cheek still bore a faint bruise, now a shade of purple-green. In her small rented room on the edge of Chula Vista, she sat on the edge of the creaky twin bed, a mug of cold tea forgotten beside her. The TV on the nightstand played the same clip again and again. Vanessa on stage, introducing Margaret with reverence. This woman raised me with nothing but kindness and strength. When I was lost, she gave me purpose. Margaret spoke, then her voice honeyed her eyes, glistening on cue. We didn't have much. I worked double shifts, cleaning motel rooms, saved every penny for Vanessa's books. It was just the two of us against the world. A soft applause from the press, a flash, a headline across the bottom of the screen, "Mother and daughter, together at last." Eleanor turned off the television. She sat in silence, staring at the black screen. Her hands moved instinctively, picked up the landline. She dialed the number she hadn't tried in years. Vanessa's personal line. 3 rings. 4. Then voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Vanessa Lynn Carter. Please leave a message." She didn't. Instead, Eleanor grabbed her coat and left the room. The streets in her old neighborhood looked smaller now. The fig tree by Mrs. Alvarez's house had been cut down. The corner shop had new signage. She walked slowly past the fence where Vanessa used to wait for the school bus. That memory didn't feel like it belonged to this world anymore. Outside the townhouse next door, Mrs. Lucille, their old neighbor, was sweeping the porch. Eleanor hesitated, then approached. "Lucille?" she said softly. The woman turned her eyes, squinting, then widened. "Eleanor? My God, it's been, what, a decade?" Eleanor gave a tired smile. "I was just in the neighborhood." Lucille looked her up and down. Her face softened. "I saw Vanessa on TV yesterday. She didn't mention you." "No," Eleanor said. "She hasn't in a long time." Lucille frowned. "Are you sure she even tells people you're her mother anymore? I mean, she calls that other woman." She lowered her voice. "Margaret, I think. Mom. Just, are you sure, Eleanor, that she still sees you that way?" The words were meant with concern, but they cut all the same. Eleanor didn't answer. She turned, murmured a goodbye, and walked away. Back at her room, the sun had dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the cracked walls. She opened the top drawer of the old dresser, reached inside. There, wrapped in a faded silk scarf, was the box. Small, wooden, smooth with age. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside a crumpled poem Vanessa had written in 5th grade, "My mama is made of sunlight." A photo of them at the beach sand, stuck to their shins. A note in blue ink, "Don't ever go away, okay?" Vanessa had been 10. Eleanor sat there holding the pieces as if trying to remember how to breathe again. Eleanor unfolded the brittle page with careful fingers, as though it might crumble if she breathed too hard. The edges had browned with age, soft from time and handling. She read the words aloud in a whisper. "Mom is my little sun. I am her bright drop of light. When she laughs, I bloom. When she cries, I shrink. Stay with me forever, okay?" Vanessa had been 9 when she wrote it. Crayons on lined school paper, a smiling stick figure of a mother and daughter drawn below the final line. Eleanor smiled faintly. It was a crooked smile, one tinged with something too heavy to lift. "She loved me." Then she murmured, So what? What turned her heart like this? She sat alone at the small table in her rented room, the single yellow bulb above her casting shadows on the walls. The faint scent of citrus still lingered from the crushed orange she'd rescued and placed near the window, a strange form of defiance. The room was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards when someone moved in the unit above. The drawer creaked as she opened it further. Piece by piece, she pulled out fragments of their life together, a birthday card Vanessa had made in second-grade photographs from the community centre picnic, and a tiny receipt from a thrift store dress Eleanor had once bought for Vanessa's sixth-grade recital. In the corner sat her old work badge, wrinkled, faded Eleanor Harper store clerk. The logo of the supermarket where she had worked for 19 years was nearly rubbed off. She traced the letters like they were old friends. A gentle knock came at the door. Eleanor looked up. "Come in," she said softly. Ruby stepped in, a plump woman in her early 70s, with short silver curls and kind eyes. She carried 2 mugs of tea steam swirling upward like soft ghosts. "You've been quiet all evening," Ruby said, setting the tea down. "That's saying something in this building." Eleanor offered a tired smile. "Didn't mean to worry you." Ruby sat across from her, glancing at the papers strewn across the table. Memory lane. Something like that. They sipped tea in silence for a moment before Ruby spoke again. "Sometimes it's best to let the past stay in the past." Eleanor looked down at the poem again. "I'm not trying to rewrite anything. I want the truth to be where it belongs, even if it's only for me." Ruby didn't press further. She simply nodded and reached for a sugar cube. After Ruby left, Eleanor began to fold the letters one by one, placing them into a wooden box she had brought from her old house, one of the few things that had survived the move. She paused when a photograph fluttered to the floor. She picked it up carefully. Vanessa, age 11, in her graduation gown from elementary school, standing next to her Eleanor with her arms wrapped tightly around her daughter. They were both laughing, real unposed joy etched into the moment like sunlight. The back of the photo read in Vanessa's handwriting, "Best day ever." Mom made it perfect. Eleanor sat for a long while, the photo resting on her lap. Her fingers trembled, not from age, but from something stirring deeper, an ache reshaping into resolve. She reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered, then began typing slowly, "Private Investigator San Diego, discreet. Do you want the truth, or do you want something back that you've lost?" The voice on the other end of the line was low, sandpapered by time and cigarettes. Eleanor paused, phone pressed to her ear. The sun poured hot and uninvited through the lace curtain of her motel window. It was the first time in years she'd dialed a number without knowing exactly what she was going to say. "I want both," she replied quietly but clearly. The next afternoon, she found herself sitting at a small riverside cafe, its peeling green awning fluttering against a backdrop of dry reeds and the sluggish murmur of the water. The tables were old wood chipped and wobbling, the kind you wouldn't lean on with full trust. A few men in fishing hats and collared shirts played cards at the far end of the patio. A waitress with tired eyes brought Eleanor a lukewarm cup of coffee. Across from her sat Joe Patterson. He looked exactly as his voice suggested, 60-ish grey stubble-tan trench coat that had seen better years. His hands were rough fingernails, square and clean. He didn't offer a smile, just a direct gaze that measured rather than greeted. Eleanor placed the small envelope between them. He opened it carefully. A photo of a young Vanessa, a handwritten poem, a birthday card, and a newspaper clipping featuring Margaret receiving an award for lifetime contributions to community healing. Joe scanned the poem first, murmuring the title. Mum is my little son. Cute. So this Margaret, she's the one pretending to be your daughter's mother now. She's not pretending, Eleanor said, her voice low. Everyone believes her, including Vanessa. He lifted an eyebrow. You sure you're not just remembering wrong? Eleanor stared at him. Would you ask me that if I were a man holding these? Joe looked at her again, this time longer. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small folder. This woman, Margaret T. Ellis, her name wasn't always Margaret, used to go by Peggy Thomas, was a theme park performer in the 90s. Balloons' birthday parties sometimes did impressions of famous moms from TV. Eleanor blinked. Joe laid a newspaper page in front of her, its yellowing edges fluttering slightly in the breeze. A photo, dated 1998, showed a smiling woman in a polka dot dress surrounded by children. A caption beneath it read, Local entertainer accused of impersonating welfare caseworker. No charges filed. She has a habit, Joe said. Latching onto people. Places where she can insert herself. A few years ago, she got caught pretending to be the estranged aunt of a hospice patient. Eleanor stared at the photo. The nose was sharper back then, hair a different colour. But it was her. That same eerie warmth in the smile, like a blanket, wrapped too tightly around a lie. They built it all, she whispered. All of it. The mother-daughter story, the interviews, the charity speeches. Joe folded his arms. People see what they want to see. If she gave your daughter what you didn't, or what she thinks you didn't, well, that's enough for a good story. The truth comes later, if it comes at all. I want it to come, Eleanor said. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a small zippered pouch. This is what I have saved. I know it's not much. He didn't reach for it. I don't take jobs for pity, only if I think there's something worth chasing. And I think you've got something, Mrs. Harper. The waitress walked by, eyeing them subtly. Joe sipped his coffee, then stood and placed a worn business card on the table. We'll start with her background, connections, financials. If she's got secrets, I'll find them. Eleanor's eyes remained locked on the photo of Margaret of Peggy, surrounded by balloons, her grin too large for the frame. When did the lie begin? She murmured, barely audible. And how long have I been erased? Eleanor muted the television, but the images remained, Vanessa leaning into the arms of a woman. Not her mother, both caught in a warm embrace as the audience applauded. The moment had been crafted perfectly for daytime television, soft lighting, gentle piano music in the background, and the glint of a single tear sliding down Margaret's cheek. Eleanor sat still on the small couch, one hand resting on the remote, the other gripping the thin blanket on her lap. She had watched it from the start, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. This was no longer just about memories, it was about control. And the woman on that screen had claimed hers. Joe's words from days earlier rang in her ears, media is a tool. Whoever controls it controls memory. On screen, the host leaned in. Tell us, Margaret, how did you raise such a remarkable woman through so much hardship? Margaret gave a breathy laugh, humble and theatrical. We had so little, but we made do. I remember nights we only had bread soaked in water, and she'd look up at me and say, Mama, this is the best dinner ever. The audience sighed. A single clap broke into a round of applause. Vanessa nodded, eyes shining. She never made me feel like we were poor. She was always smiling, always strong. Eleanor's chest tightened. She reached for her phone, lifted it, and snapped a picture of the screen. The image, Vanessa's head resting gently on Margaret's shoulder, framed by a glowing caption. Healing together, the mother-daughter, bond that defied the odds. She forwarded it to Joe without a caption. From the hallway, the light creak of floorboards. Ruby stepped into the room holding a tray with 2 steaming cups of tea. She didn't look at the television. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she placed the tray on the table, gently set a hand on Eleanor's shoulder, and said softly, "The orange tree on the balcony. It's blooming." Eleanor turned to her, surprised. Already Ruby offered a faint smile. "First bloom I've seen in years." When Ruby left, Eleanor stood and walked to the sliding door. The rain outside was light, the kind that barely made sound, but clung to everything like a whisper. There it was, the small potted orange tree she had rescued from a discount nursery. A single bloom, pale white, opened like a secret glowing faintly against the grey afternoon. And just like that, she was somewhere else. It was Vanessa's 10th birthday. Eleanor remembered the dim kitchen, the smell of cheap flour and vanilla extract, the way her hands trembled as she whisked the batter, the money borrowed from a co-worker at the supermarket just to buy the ingredients. The cake had been lopsided, the frosting thin. But when Vanessa saw it, she screamed with joy and threw her arms around her mother. "You made me a real cake," she'd whispered through tears. "No one else ever has." That memory settled over her like mist, tender and piercing. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. A message from Joe. I found her real name. Margaret T. Ellis is an alias. Eleanor looked once more at the orange blossom, then down at her hands, hands that had baked cakes, clipped coupons, held a child through fever and night terrors. Hands that were now reaching back into the shadows, searching not just for truth, but for the shape of something that had once been hers. Her real name is Deborah Ann Kilroy, Joe said, laying the manila folder flat on the table between them. She lost a son car accident. 1996. After that, she started playing roles. Rain tapped persistently against the window of Joe's rented office. It was the kind of dull grey day where time seemed suspended, soaked in damp air and nicotine. The desk lamp cast a honey-coloured light across the mess of paperwork, dog-eared files, and 2 cold cups of black coffee. Eleanor didn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the photograph inside the folder. Margaret, or rather Deborah, laughing in a candid shot taken years ago. It was the same smile Eleanor had once believed was maternal warmth. But now it chilled her. Too perfect. Too rehearsed. Joe leaned back in his chair with a groan. She worked in Disneyland as a character actor in the late 80s. Ariel, then Mary Poppins for a while. Good at staying in costume. Then she disappeared off the radar. Reappeared in Oregon, claiming to be a retired nurse, raising a niece with leukemia. That niece never existed. Eleanor said nothing. Her fingers tightened slightly around the arm of the chair. Joe continued flipping to another page. 10 years ago, she cozied up to a small-time tech entrepreneur, claimed to be his long-lost mother. She played the role for 2 years, gave interviews about surviving homelessness, built an entire brand around their miracle reunion, helped launch his mental wellness app. Eleanor exhaled slowly, and no one checked. Joe gave a bitter laugh. People don't want truth, Eleanor. They want stories, especially the kind that go viral. He slid forward a printout, a bank transfer receipt. $500,000. Transferred from Vanessa Harper to Margaret T. Ellis last spring. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. She reached out and placed her palm flat on the folder, the texture of the paper rough beneath her skin. People need to see this. Joe studied her for a moment. "And what do you plan to do?" "I won't shout," she replied quietly. "But I won't be silent either. I have proof now. That's louder than any scream." Joe leaned back again, nodding once. Outside, the rain was coming down harder now, a slow, rhythmic tapping against the glass that matched Eleanor's thoughts, steady, deliberate. She stood, took the folder, and placed it gently into her bag. "Thank you, Joe," she said. He looked up. "Just be careful. People protect their illusions." Eleanor offered a faint smile. "So do mothers." She stepped into the hallway, the hum of an old vending machine buzzing in the background. Her phone felt cool in her hand. She hesitated for only a second, then opened her contacts and dialed. A voice answered. Young, polished, curious. "This is Jenna from the San Diego Chronicle. How can I help you?" Eleanor's voice was clear. "You wrote a feature on Vanessa Harper 3 years ago, the piece titled From Orphan to Icon." A pause. "Yes, that was mine." "I'd like to meet," Eleanor said. "There's something you should see." "You wrote the first story about my daughter?" Eleanor said, her voice calm but unwavering. "Now it's time you write the rest." The cafe was quiet, tucked between a used bookstore and a bicycle repair shop near the university campus. The air was crisp early winter in Southern California, with dry leaves skittering across the pavement outside. Inside, it smelled faintly of cinnamon and worn pages. Craig Holman sat across from Eleanor, his laptop closed, a notebook at the ready. He was 32, sharp-eyed, with a mop of dark hair and the slightly disheveled look of someone who lived between deadlines. "I remember the article," he said. "Vanessa Harper, the CEO who came from nothing. The story practically wrote itself." Eleanor reached into her handbag, carefully drawing out a folded piece of paper. "This was written by Vanessa when she was 10. A poem. She used to call me her son." Craig unfolded the paper, scanning the faded crayon lines. His expression shifted as he read. Then she handed him a second item, a short letter in a child's handwriting. "I love you, Mum. Even when I'm rich, I'll still hug you every day." He looked up slowly. "She wrote this?" Eleanor nodded. "Before I became a ghost." Craig didn't speak for a moment. He tapped the edge of the paper lightly. "What happened?" Eleanor told him. "Not everything, not yet. But enough. About the woman called Margaret, about the televised lies, and finally about the transfer." She pulled out a photocopy of the bank record Joe had given her and laid it on the table. Craig's eyes widened. $500,000, he murmured, tracing the figures. "If this is real, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't," Eleanor said. He sat back in his chair, brow furrowed. "I'll need to verify everything, and I can't run it unless I have corroboration. But if this holds up, this could ruin her." Eleanor held his gaze. "I'm not trying to ruin anyone. I'm not out for revenge. I'm just reclaiming my name." Craig studied her. "You realize people won't believe you at first? They've built her up as a symbol of survival. You're asking them to rewrite what they want to believe." Eleanor folded the poem gently and placed it back into her bag. "I'm not asking them to rewrite anything. I'm just showing them what they chose not to see." A silence settled between them, broken only by the hiss of steamed milk behind the counter. Then Craig spoke again, cautiously. "Do you have any photos? Videos? Anything recent that shows you and Vanessa together?" Eleanor blinked, then frowned slightly. A memory flickered. The neighbor across the street. The doorbell camera. She looked up. Maybe she said, "There's a house across from Vanessa's. They might have seen what happened that day." Craig opened his notebook and started writing. Eleanor sat back in her chair, her fingers wrapped around her cup. The tea had gone cold. But something in her was warming, not fire, not fury, but a quiet heat that came with standing up finally in full light. "I think my doorbell camera caught something that day." "The old woman, she looked terrified," said the neighbor softly. Eleanor stood on the small front porch of a modest one-story house just across from Vanessa's gated estate. The house had a garden full of wind chimes and potted rosemary, and the familiar hum of a neighborhood that still remembered who you were, even when they didn't say it aloud. She clutched a small bag of oranges in her left hand. Not the same bag, but the gesture was the same. Mildred, a woman in her 70s, with soft grey hair, pinned back, neatly opened the door. Her expression flickered when she saw Eleanor recognition, then something like apology. "I didn't know what to do back then," she said. "I just stood behind my curtains and watched." Eleanor nodded. "I understand." They stepped inside. The air was warm with the scent of old wood and faint lavender. Mildred led her to a tiny living room with a flat screen mounted just above a lace-covered shelf. She picked up a small remote and tapped through the recorded clips. "It took me a while to find it again," she murmured. "I didn't delete it. I couldn't." The screen flickered to life. There it was, the iron gate, Eleanor's slender figure standing just outside, gently placing the bag of oranges down. Vanessa appeared next, storming forward, voice rising. "Me toi chet roy ma," she shouted, loud, furious. The camera caught everything. The shove, Eleanor stumbling backward, the bag tearing, oranges rolling across the concrete. And then Margaret emerging calmly from the house, slipping an arm around Vanessa's shoulders as if she were shielding her from a stranger. The image froze. Mildred turned to Eleanor. "I wasn't brave enough then, but I can be now." She held out a small USB stick. "Here, take it." Eleanor accepted it with both hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, Craig sat in his car across the street. He didn't interfere, just watched respectfully. When Eleanor returned, she passed him the USB. Craig plugged it into his laptop, and within minutes his fingers were flying across the keys. It's clear. Date stamped. You can see the emotion, the contradiction between what she says and what's happening. He paused, then looked up at her. "Are you absolutely sure you want this to go national? This won't just be a blog post, Eleanor. This will be syndicated. Television panels think pieces. There'll be backlash." Eleanor's eyes met his. Steady. "If I don't speak, I will disappear for real. That's already happened once." Craig nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure the world listens." That night, back in her small rented room, Eleanor sat by the window with a blanket over her knees. The rain had started again, light and tapping. She glanced at the small orange tree Ruby had helped her repot weeks ago, its first fruits still green but promising. Her phone buzzed. An email from Craig. Subject, draft ready. "Awaiting your final review preview, The Erased Mother. The truth behind an inspirational lie." Eleanor didn't open it right away. She just stared at the subject line, a title that for once didn't turn her into a footnote. Outside, the wind shifted, and a single orange fell from the tree onto the windowsill with a soft thump. She smiled. Less than 6 hours after Craig's article went live, it had been shared over 5,000 times. Eleanor sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea. The world outside remained unaware that something quiet yet monumental had shifted. Birdsong pierced the crisp early winter air. The little orange tree outside her window, still damp from the night's rain, bore 3 fruit now. One leaned heavily to the side, as though uncertain whether to fall. Eleanor hadn't turned on the television. She didn't need to. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, mentions, tags, headlines. Some called her brave. Others called her a ghost come back to haunt. And in between all the noise, one message stood out. It came from Vanessa. A voice note. 17 seconds. Eleanor pressed play. Why did you do this? Vanessa's voice cracked through the speaker, laced with something raw, not quite grief, not quite rage. You were gone. I thought you were dead. I needed someone. Why couldn't you just stay gone? The words sat in the air for a moment before Eleanor hit delete. She didn't cry. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned her phone face down and looked at the wall across from her, the spot where she'd tacked up a copy of Vanessa's childhood poem, You Are My Sun, and I Am Your Little Ray. Ruby came in from the kitchen holding a plate of toast neither of them really wanted. She placed it on the table, then sat beside Eleanor. You haven't replied to anyone, she asked gently. Eleanor shook her head. I don't need to. The truth is, speaking just fine. The air inside was still, but outside the storm raged. News channels flashed Vanessa's name with headlines that alternated between scandal and sympathy. Was she a victim of misunderstanding? Or had she built an empire on lies, talk shows, debated the ethics of identity, motherhood, and performance? One anchor tearfully read aloud an excerpt from Craig's article, pausing on the phrase, she did not seek revenge, only remembrance. Then came another message, this time from Craig calling directly. 3 networks want interviews, he said. One wants to do a sit-down special, just you, no cameras in your face on your terms. No, Eleanor said calmly. I said what I needed to say. A beat of silence. Then Craig replied, they'll keep calling. I'm not running from them, she replied. I'm just not chasing anything either. That evening, Ruby folded a blanket around Eleanor's shoulders before heading to her own room. The little orange tree rustled gently outside. Eleanor's tea had gone cold again. She didn't bother reheating it. Then the phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She stared at it, finger hovering. Then she pressed answer and raised it slowly to her ear. A pause. Then a voice, quiet, trembling. It's me. Eleanor closed her eyes. I'm here, she said softly. It's your mother, Vanessa. Why won't you answer me? Do you want me to fall apart? Vanessa's voice cracked through the voicemail, raw with panic and pride. Eleanor sat in her small kitchen, a cup of warm chamomile tea in her hands. The early morning sun filtered gently through the lace curtains, casting soft shadows on the checkered tablecloth. The message replayed in her mind not once, but twice. She didn't move to play it again. Ruby entered without knocking, holding a basket of oranges and a knowing look. She's finally calling you Mother, isn't she? Eleanor said nothing, only sipped her tea. Her hands were steady. She says it now, because she needs you. Ruby continued. Not because she remembers you. Another voicemail arrived, this one longer. Vanessa's voice was unsteady, a mixture of desperation and calculation. The board is in chaos, she said. The investors are pulling out. I didn't know what Deborah really was. I swear it, Mum. I was trying to build something. I just needed a story people could follow. A mother who believed in me, and she filled that role. There was a pause, as if Vanessa struggled to shape her next words. Please, I need help. I need something to show them. Money, a statement, anything. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the silence sink in. Outside, the breeze stirred the curtain. The scent of citrus drifted faintly from the balcony. She doesn't even ask how you are, Ruby murmured, sitting down across from her. Only what you can give. Eleanor stood, placed her cup in the sink, and said quietly, she never asked who I was, either. Later that morning, Eleanor walked through the rows of citrus trees behind the farmer's market, a tiny trowel in hand. The small sapling she had planted weeks ago now stood firm, a thin thread of green curling around its base. She knelt down, adjusting the soil with gentle hands. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A new message. Vanessa again. "If you don't help me," she said sharply, "people will think you orchestrated this, that you wanted to ruin me. The media already loves a fallen icon. They'll tear me apart." Eleanor stared at the bark of the young tree. A small ant crawled along a stem, indifferent to empires falling or daughters begging. She didn't respond. She reached for the watering can nearby and began slowly drenching the roots. The soil darkened, soaking up the quiet. The tiny camellia next to the orange tree swayed gently unnoticed. Then she saw it. A cream-coloured envelope nestled just beneath the edge of a root, its corner barely poking from the dirt. No stamp, no name. Just an old-style fold, tucked neatly as if placed there with purpose. Eleanor set the watering can aside and picked it up, brushing soil from the edge. She turned it in her hands. There was no return address, no handwriting, just weight. She slipped the envelope into her coat pocket and stood there for a while longer, watching the light shift through the orange leaves. Something was changing, not just in the world outside, but in her place within it. "You've owned land since 1985, and now it's part of the new industrial zone." Ruby's voice barely rose above a whisper as she held the aged property deed in trembling hands. The soft light of early winter filtered through the window of Ruby's living room. Papers were spread across the kitchen table, yellowed, frayed at the edges, and signed with a neat looping script that had not changed in decades. The envelope Eleanor found under the orange tree had contained more than documents. It held a buried truth. "I never expected it to be worth anything," Eleanor said gently as she folded a notarized survey map. "Back then, it was just dirt and wind. I only wanted a place no one could take from me." Ruby's eyes scanned the deed again. 12 acres on what's now tech corridor land. "Eleanor, this isn't just a field anymore. It's millions." Eleanor didn't flinch. She poured 2 cups of tea, steady as ever. "I didn't buy it for that. I bought it for silence. Silence after a decade working night shifts at a supermarket. Silence after raising a child alone and being told love required sacrifice, always hers. Silence when her daughter stopped calling and the mailbox stopped bearing anything except bills and donation flyers." Ruby sipped her tea, slowly watching her friend. "Do you plan to use this to help Vanessa?" Eleanor looked out the window where the afternoon sun warmed the orange leaves, now tinged with yellow. "She once said I'd died when she was 6, Eleanor said quietly. "Who rescues a ghost?" There was no bitterness in her tone, only a finality that had taken years to arrive. Ruby was silent for a long moment, then reached for one of the property assessments. "You could help a lot of people, without anyone ever knowing your name." Eleanor nodded. She pulled out her old flip phone and dialed a number from memory. The voice on the other end was warm, familiar, professional. "Jack Alvarez," she said. "It's Eleanor Harper. I'd like to update my will." Jack was quiet a moment before responding, still looking to keep things quiet, quieter than ever. She replied, "I want it all placed into a fund. For local farmers, one's too small to compete with the corporations swallowing the valley." "You know the type." "I do," Jack said, "and I'll make it happen." As she ended the call, Eleanor felt something loosen inside her, not like a dam breaking, but like a knot slowly untying. She gathered the papers and placed them back in the envelope, smoothing the crease one last time. The phone buzzed again. A text. "Vanessa. If you don't help me, I'll go public. I'll tell them you abandoned me when I needed you most." Eleanor stared at the words, her expression unchanged. She set the phone down, picked up the tea tray, and walked it to the sink. She didn't delete the message. She didn't reply. She simply stood there, facing the small kitchen window, the fading sun behind her. There were some lies so large they collapsed under their own weight, and some ghosts, they learned to root themselves and bloom again. "Who are you planting that orange tree for?" The small voice came from just beyond the fence. Eleanor turned trowel in hand and saw Sophie, the girl from next door, her cheeks pink from the morning chill, her jacket sleeves a bit too long. The little dog, Benji, scampered past her and nosed at the fallen leaves scattered across Eleanor's garden. "For no one in particular," Eleanor said softly. "Or maybe for someone I haven't met yet." Sophie tilted her head. "Can I help?" Eleanor gestured to the empty patch of soil beside the sapling. "I suppose this side could use some attention." They knelt together in the dirt, the older woman guiding the child's small hands, helping her loosen the soil gently around the base of the sprouting tree. The early winter sun peeked through the branches, casting a warm gold on their faces. In the quiet rustle of leaves and the soft breath of wind, the world felt for a moment whole. Sophie brushed dirt from her knees. "I don't have a grandma," she said, matter-of-factly. Eleanor paused, her hands still. "No." The girl shook her head. "Not a real one. She passed away when I was a baby. My mum says she would have spoiled me rotten." Eleanor smiled faintly. She probably would have. There was a beat of silence. Then Sophie asked, her voice tentative, "Could I call you Grandma sometimes?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She reached down and patted the soil around the young orange tree fingers, slow and steady. Then she turned to Sophie, eyes gentler than they'd been in weeks. "If we plant this tree together," she said, "we'll both have to take care of it. Water it. Watch it grow." Sophie nodded eagerly. "We can keep it a secret. Like a pact." Eleanor chuckled. "A secret between two gardeners. Sounds fair." Ruby appeared at the edge of the yard with a plate of warm muffins. She didn't speak, only smiled when she saw the two sitting cross-legged in the soil, the orange sapling between them like a shared promise. They ate the muffins in silence, the dog curled at Sophie's feet, the smell of citrus beginning to rise faintly from the leaves. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor didn't think about Vanessa. She didn't hear the angry voicemails, didn't reread the threats. She thought only of the way Sophie had looked at her, not with judgment or need, but with hope. When Sophie left, skipping toward her front porch, Benji at her heels, Eleanor stood alone in the yard for a long time. The orange tree's thin trunk bent slightly in the breeze. She looked past it toward the street that curved into the hills beyond. Somewhere out there, threads were still tangled wounds, still raw. But for now, they didn't belong in her garden. She wiped her hands on her apron, brushed a leaf from her shoulder, and whispered to no one. "It's time I visit someone." Then, without another word, she stepped inside to change. "We're not mother and daughter anymore. We're just two women with different pasts." Eleanor's voice echoed softly through the foyer, absorbed by the polished walls of the now empty mansion. She stood near the entrance, her coat still damp from the light drizzle outside her shoes, silent against the marble floor. No one stopped her this time. No barking guards, no slamming door. Only the faint creak of old wood and the scent of a house losing its purpose. A maid passed by in the hallway, head down, eyes avoiding Eleanor's. The help had begun, leaving some dismissed, some departing voluntarily after the scandal broke. Vanessa sat alone on the couch in the sunken living room. Her hair was unbrushed, eyes puffy from sleepless nights. The hard shell of glamour cracked and peeled away. Eleanor entered without a word, pausing just inside the room. For a long while, neither of them moved. "You came?" Vanessa said at last, her voice raw. I said I would. Vanessa gestured toward the chair across from her. Please? Eleanor remained standing. Vanessa looked down at her hands, twisting a silk handkerchief into knots. I was scared, she said. I built something. It was fragile. Deborah offered to help. I didn't know who she really was. You knew she wasn't me, Eleanor replied. Silence filled the space between them like smoke. Vanessa's lips trembled. I needed someone. Someone the world could love. Someone who didn't remind them I grew up in a trailer and ate canned soup for years. So you replaced the truth with a better story, Eleanor said evenly, and the world applauded. Vanessa blinked away tears. I'm sorry. I truly am. I didn't realize how much I missed you until the brand cracked. No, Vanessa whispered. Until I heard your voice on the phone. It sounded like home. Eleanor's gaze softened just for a moment, but it didn't linger. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a tiny envelope. She crossed the room, laid it gently on the table between them. Inside was a single orange seed. Vanessa looked down, confused. What is this A beginning? Eleanor said. You can't fake what you grow yourself. Vanessa picked up the seed delicately like it might vanish. I can't fix everything, she murmured. Then don't, Eleanor said quietly. Grow something else. Learn what it's like to wait, to tend, to care without applause. Vanessa opened her mouth, but Eleanor had already turned to go. At the doorway, she paused just once. I'm not angry anymore. But I won't be part of this illusion. Vanessa stood slowly, her fingers still curled around the seed. Will you ever come back? Eleanor didn't answer. She stepped outside into the chilled evening air, pulled her coat tighter, and walked away without looking back. Inside, Vanessa sat alone, holding the tiny orange seed in her palm. She stared at it, as if waiting for it to speak. But it didn't. And for the first time in a very long time, she realized no one else could tell her what to do with it. There are doors that don't slam shut. They simply never open again. The sentence echoed in Eleanor's mind as she leaned down beside the orange tree. The pot was now too small for its roots, curling along the bottom, tiny green buds pushing out at the tips. Spring would arrive soon. She could feel it in the smell of damp earth, the softness of the sun through the clouds. Sophie crouched next to her, pressing her small finger against one of the buds. This one looks like it's smiling. Eleanor smiled faintly. Maybe it is. It's made it through winter. The garden had changed. Not in grand ways, there were no sweeping renovations, no news cameras parked outside. But little things had begun to bloom, a hand-drawn card from a neighbour's child pinned to the fridge, a jar of homemade marmalade from Ruby on the table, a paper crane folded by Sophie now swaying near the window. Eleanor had not invited attention, and yet warmth had come anyway. Ruby appeared on the porch, holding a sealed envelope with an embossed logo. Mail, from the Community Garden Committee. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and took it. Inside was a typed letter, carefully worded an invitation to speak at a gathering of women recovering from personal loss. They had read about her quiet resilience, heard about her garden. Someone had described her as a woman who grew dignity from the ashes of erasure. Ruby watched her read, then said softly, "They want you to speak on television too, but I told them you might prefer something smaller." Eleanor gave a knowing look. A church basement with too many folding chairs and lukewarm tea sounds just right. The afternoon drifted by gently. Sophie drew a picture of their orange tree with fat, round fruits and labelled it Our Magic Tree. Eleanor laughed, taping it to the fridge beside another that simply read, "To my new grandma." Later alone, Eleanor stood in front of the old oak cabinet in her room. She opened it slowly, her hands hovering over folded linens, photo albums, and a small wooden box. She sat with it on her lap and opened it. Inside lay a yellowed letter, written in Vanessa's handwriting, a thank you note from when she was 12, thanking her mother for baking a birthday cake even when we had no eggs. There was a faded handkerchief embroidered with her own mother's initials, still carrying the faint scent of lavender, a broken brooch, a snapshot of the trailer they used to live in. One by one, Eleanor placed the items back in the box. Then she paused. "I don't hold pain as evidence anymore," she said aloud, gently closing the lid. "Now it's compost." She chuckled softly, not with bitterness, but with relief. It had taken her most of her life to understand that memory could nourish rather than imprison. As the sun dipped behind the fence, casting long shadows over the garden, Sophie ran over with muddy shoes and a curious look. Eleanor straightened up and met her eyes. "I saved one last seed," she said, pressing it into the girl's small, eager hand. "Next time it's your turn to plant." Sophie looked down at the seed, then back up. "Will it grow? It will," Eleanor replied. "But only if you're patient." They stood there a while, an old woman and a young girl, surrounded by the quiet joy of things not asked for, but given freely. Behind them, the door to Eleanor's house creaked gently in the wind, never quite closing, but no longer waiting to open again. "I'm not sure the tree will grow, but I want to try." Sophie's voice was barely louder than the wind, her small hand clutched tightly around the orange seed Eleanor had given her. They stood together in the garden, bathed in the soft light of a spring morning. The earth was damp rich and smelled of things ready to awaken. Eleanor knelt beside the girl, her old joints creaking but steady. She pushed aside a tuft of early grass, exposing the dark soil. "That's enough sun. Not too much shade. Here's a good spot." Sophie nodded solemnly. She dug with her hands carefully as Eleanor watched with a quiet pride that didn't need words. Ruby appeared with a small trowel and 2 mugs of tea, one for Eleanor and one in a cartoon cup for Sophie. "You girls look busy," she said, setting the cups down. "We're starting something," Eleanor replied, or trying to. The hole was ready. Sophie placed the seed into it like a fragile memory. Eleanor guided her hand. "Now pat the earth gently, like you're touching something you don't want to forget." They covered the seed. Sophie stood up and looked down at the spot, then back at Eleanor. "What if it never grows?" Eleanor placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Some things don't, but planting them still means you're alive." A silence followed, not empty, but full. The kind of silence that held space for meaning. Across the fence, a few neighbors had gathered. No one spoke. They simply stood and watched the moment. A child, kneeling a seed, buried an old woman standing behind her. It wasn't a ceremony, but something sacred was happening. Ruby leaned close and whispered, "That journalist called again. Said a publisher wants to buy the rights to your story. Wants to make it a documentary." Eleanor didn't turn her head. "They don't want my story. They want a happy ending. A ribbon to tie it all up. And you're not giving it to them?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "No. Some stories aren't made to be wrapped. They're meant to be lived through. Quietly." Sophie picked up the small watering can Ruby had left and with great care poured a thin stream over the fresh soil. Water seeped into the ground slowly. The seed disappeared from view, gone but not lost. Eleanor exhaled softly. There are things, she murmured, that may never sprout. But the act of planting them, It keeps us breathing. A hush fell over the garden. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the right words had already been spoken. The wind shifted gently just enough to stir the leaves of the older orange tree behind them. Its branches swayed, and one golden leaf tumbled free, spiraling down like a whisper. Sophie looked up. Did the tree hear us? Eleanor smiled. Maybe. Or maybe it was just spring doing what it always did when the past had been buried deep enough to let something new grow. What does the world remember of a mother never mentioned? The morning mist hung low over the backyard, softening the edges of the world like gauze. It clung to the orange leaves wrapped around the new shoots and kissed the petals of the first flowers. The only sounds were the slow rustling of trees and the occasional chirp of a bird, hesitant to start its song. Eleanor sat on her wooden bench beside the older orange tree wrapped in her shawl, her breath visible in the chill. A steaming cup of tea rested beside her. Ruby had made it just the way she liked strong dark, with a hint of orange zest. From the porch, Ruby waved, then disappeared back inside. Across the yard, Sophie was sprawled on a mat, crayons scattered drawing a picture. Eleanor could already guess what it was, a tree, with round orange fruit, a crooked little house, and two smiling figures holding hands underneath. She held a sheet of paper in her lap, a letter, but not addressed to anyone. It was for herself. Not to explain, not to record, but simply to acknowledge. The words were plain. I was a daughter. I was a mother. I was forgotten. But I did not disappear. I planted, I waited, and I watched something grow. And that was enough. She folded it once, twice, and tucked it inside an old book of garden notes. No one would read it, and that was fine. Some seeds were meant to remain buried. Ruby returned, holding a small photo frame. "Look what they sent," she said, handing it to Eleanor. Inside was a photo taken by someone from the local community group, Eleanor, kneeling by the orange tree dirt on her hands, Sophie beside her. They want to use it for a feature, Silent Guardians, stories of unseen women who build things that last. Eleanor studied the photo for a long moment. Then she shook her head. Tell them thank you. But no. Ruby sat down beside her. You sure it's a good picture? I don't need anyone to remember my name, Eleanor said softly. If they remember the tree, that's enough. It was planted by someone. That's all they need to know. She looked toward the back corner of the garden where Sophie had planted her seed just days before. The soil still looked fresh, darker than the rest. Nothing visible yet, but Eleanor knew the root's journey had already begun. She stood up slowly and made her way to the shed. From a rusted tin box, she took out a small bundle wrapped in cloth, a letter, its edges curled, the ink slightly faded. It was the last thing Vanessa had written to her before she left home at 17. It wasn't cruel, just distant. I have to become someone else. I can't grow where you are. I'm sorry. Eleanor read it one last time. Her hand didn't shake as it used to. She walked to the stone fire pit at the far edge of the garden. There she struck a match and lit the corner of the letter. It caught slowly curling inward like a leaf in autumn. Flames licked the paper's edge, devouring it in silence. When it was nothing but ash, she scattered it among the roots of the older tree. The wind took some of it into the sky like a whisper finally released. She didn't cry. She didn't feel triumphant either. She simply felt free. By midday, the mist had lifted, replaced by thin light filtering through pale clouds. Eleanor returned to the bench, her steps steady. The earth beneath her feet was soft from the morning dew, but it no longer sank beneath her like it used to. She moved through her garden as if she belonged to it, not the other way around. Sophie came running up, waving her drawing. Look, I finished it. Eleanor leaned in. The picture was a little smudged, but unmistakable. A large tree with oranges the size of suns, a small house with smoke curling from the chimney, and two smiling figures beneath it, one with silver hair, the other with a big purple bow. Eleanor tapped the tree with her finger. You think it'll get this big? Sophie grinned. I hope so. They walked over to the small plot where the seed had been buried just a few days earlier. Sophie knelt down, brushing away a few leaves. Nothing yet. It takes time, Eleanor said. Roots come first. The parts we can't see have to grow strong before anything shows. Sophie nodded solemnly, then looked up. Can we name it? What would you call it? Sophie thought for a long time, then whispered, Hope. Eleanor smiled. Then that's what we'll call it. Behind them, Ruby stepped onto the porch with a tray. Tea for two, she called. As they sipped from mismatched mugs, Ruby handed Eleanor a clipping from the local paper. The headline read, Community Garden Grows More Than Just Plants, Stories of Quiet Resilience. Below it, a photo of Eleanor and Sophie was featured, though no names were mentioned. Just a caption. 2 generations, 1 seed at a time. They respected your wishes, Ruby said. Eleanor nodded her fingers, brushing over the page. Good. Let the tree speak for me. She stood and walked to the edge of the yard, where an old oak tree shaded a small patch of grass. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small and round, the very last orange seed she had saved tucked away months ago. She knelt, pressed her fingers into the soil, and placed the seed inside. Not as a symbol, not as a memory, just as something to be. As she covered it with earth, she whispered, For no one, for nothing, just because. She sat back on her heels, brushed her hands clean, and looked around her. The garden was quiet, but not empty. The old orange tree rustled behind her, its branches full and heavy with new blossoms. Sophie ran past with the dog, laughter trailing behind her like music. Ruby called something about cookies from the kitchen window. Eleanor closed her eyes. Somewhere in the distance, someone might still be calling her a mother. Someone else might be trying to erase her. But here in this place, with dirt on her fingers and sunlight on her face, she didn't need a name. She opened her eyes again, turning to the small sprout that had just begun pushing its way through the soil. And she whispered, I'm still here, even if no one calls me mother anymore. They erased her name, replaced her love, and rewrote her life, but they couldn't silence the truth. When the storm of lies broke, what remained was not revenge, but a woman standing quietly in her own garden unshaken. Justice may arrive late, but it resonates like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody. Some roots grow deep in silence, and when they bloom, the world must listen. Because sometimes all it takes is one woman refusing to vanish for generations to finally remember. Have you ever been erased by someone you once loved? Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Heavy Stories for more tales of justice, memory, and quiet strength.